I've been driving for what feels like an eternity, the monotony of the road stretching out before me like an endless ribbon of asphalt. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. My eyelids are heavy with fatigue, my body aching for rest. I scan the desolate landscape for any sign of civilization, hoping to find a place to pull over and catch some shut-eye. Finally, I spot it, a run-down rest stop nestled on the side of the road, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. I pull into the parking lot, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires echoing through the still night air. The rest stop looks deserted, the only sound the gentle hum of my engine. I climb out of the cab and stretch my cramped muscles, the cool night air washing over me like a balm. As I make my way towards the restrooms, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I glance around nervously, but the parking lot is empty save for my truck. Shaking off the feeling, I enter the restroom and splash some water on my face, hoping to revive myself. But as I stare into the cracked mirror, I can't shake the sense of unease that gnaws at the pit of my stomach. Something doesn't feel right about this place. I exit the restroom and head back to my truck, intending to climb into the sleeper cab and get some much-needed sleep. But as I approach the truck, I freeze in my tracks. There, in the darkness beyond the parking lot, I can hear it, a faint, whispering sound that seems to emanate from the very depths of the night. I strain my ears, trying to discern the source of the sound, but it's elusive, shifting and morphing like a shadow in the darkness. It's as if the very air itself is alive with a sinister energy, pulsing and thrumming with a malevolent presence. Heart pounding, I climb into the cab and lock the doors behind me, the sound of the whispering growing louder with each passing moment. I try to rationalize it away, telling myself it's just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I know better. I glance at the clock on the dashboard and realize with a sinking feeling that it's going to be a long night. I settle into the driver's seat, trying to make myself as comfortable as possible, but every creak and groan of the truck sends shivers down my spine. I try to distract myself by flipping through the radio stations, but each one is filled with nothing but static. It's as if the very airwaves themselves have been swallowed by the darkness, leaving me isolated and alone. As the hours drag on, the whispering grows louder and more insistent, filling the cab of the truck with an oppressive weight. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, the sense of dread tightening like a vice around my chest. I try to shut it out, to focus on anything else but the creeping sense of unease that threatens to overwhelm me. But no matter what I do, I can't escape the feeling that I'm not alone out here in the darkness. Just when I think I can't take it anymore, the whispering suddenly stops, leaving behind an eerie silence that's almost deafening in its intensity. I strain my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but the night is as still as death. And then, just when I think it's finally over, I hear it, a low, guttural growl that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My blood runs cold as I realize that I'm not alone out here in the darkness after all. With a trembling hand, I reach for the keys in the ignition, ready to make a hasty escape. But before I can start the engine, the growling gives way to a chorus of unearthly howls that echo through the night like the wails of the damned. Terrified, I fumble with the keys, desperation clawing at my throat as I struggle to start the truck. And then, just when I'm on the brink of panic, the engine roars to life, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. With a surge of adrenaline, I throw the truck into gear and peel out of the rest stop, leaving behind the darkness and the whispering voices that haunt it. As I speed down the highway, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness behind me. But there's nothing there, just the empty road stretching out behind me like a trail of breadcrumbs leading me away from the nightmare that lies in wait. And as the first light of dawn breaks over the horizon, I breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that I've escaped the darkness, for now. Let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. As a trucker, I've driven through some of the most desolate stretches of road this country has to offer. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling experience I had while driving through the remote forests of Oregon one dark and stormy night. The rain was coming down in sheets, the windshield wipers barely able to keep up with the deluge. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the dense forest that surrounded me on all sides. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white with tension. As I navigated the winding roads, I reached for the radio to try and find some distraction from the pounding rain and the darkness outside. But as I tuned the dial, all I found was static. Frustrated, I turned it off and focused on the road ahead. But then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the static, crackling and distorted as if it were coming from some far-off place. I strained to make out the words, but they were garbled and unintelligible. I furrowed my brow in confusion, wondering where the signal could be coming from. There were no towns for miles, no signs of civilization anywhere in sight. And yet, here I was, picking up a radio transmission in the middle of nowhere. Ignoring the unease that prickled at the back of my neck, I tried to tune out the strange voice and focus on the road. But the transmission grew louder and more insistent, drowning out the sound of the rain and filling the cab of my truck with an eerie sense of dread. I glanced at the radio in disbelief, wondering how it was possible that I was still picking up the signal. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the transmission cut off, leaving behind nothing but silence and the sound of my pounding heart. Shaken but determined to press on, I continued down the dark and winding road, the memory of the strange radio transmission lingering in the back of my mind like a bad dream. But as the hours passed and the storm raged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was then that I saw it, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, something darting between the trees just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes and peered into the darkness, but whatever it was had vanished without a trace. Heart pounding, I climbed out of the cab and cautiously approached the spot where I had seen the movement. But there was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant rumble of thunder. I shook my head in disbelief, trying to convince myself that it had just been a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew that something was out there, watching and waiting for me in the darkness. With a shiver of unease, I climbed back into the cab and pressed on, the road stretching out before me like an endless ribbon of darkness. But no matter how fast I drove or how far I traveled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The hours dragged on, the storm showing no signs of letting up. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the radio crackled to life once again, the same distorted voice echoing through the cab of my truck. This time, however, the words were clear, chilling me to the bone. "Turn back," it said, the voice low and menacing. "You're not welcome here." I froze in terror, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the radio, trying to silence the voice that seemed to be coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape its relentless warning. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I had stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And as the voice continued to taunt me, I knew that I was in for the fight of my life. But just when I was on the brink of despair, a break in the storm revealed a glimmer of light in the distance, the glow of a small town on the horizon. With renewed determination, I pressed on, knowing that I was one step closer to escaping the nightmare that had consumed me. As I drove into the safety of the town, I couldn't help but glance back at the dark and forbidding forest that I had just escaped. And as I did, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows, their gaze filled with malice and hunger. With a shudder, I turned away and focused on the road ahead, vowing never to return to that cursed forest again. But deep down, I knew that the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected of places. As a trucker, I've driven countless miles across the vast expanse of the United States, but nothing could have prepared me for the terrifying ordeal I experienced on a lonely stretch of highway in Wyoming. It was a cold, moonless night as I barreled down the desolate road, the only sound the steady hum of my engine and the occasional howl of the wind. The darkness seemed to swallow up the landscape around me, the only illumination coming from the weak glow of my headlights. I had been on the road for hours, my mind drifting as I navigated the empty highway. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, a shiver ran down my spine. The cargo that had been securely fastened in the back of my truck was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic surged through me as I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this have happened? I had checked and double-checked the straps before setting out on my journey, ensuring that everything was securely in place. But now, as I climbed out of the cab and inspected the empty trailer, I could find no sign of forced entry or foul play. It was as if the cargo had simply ceased to exist, evaporating into thin air without a trace. Fear gnawed at the edges of my mind as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Had someone stolen the cargo while I was driving? It seemed unlikely, given the remote location of the highway and the lack of any other vehicles on the road. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was completely alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere with no explanation for the disappearance of my cargo. And as the cold wind whispered through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, desperate for any sign of help or civilization. But to my horror, I found that I had no signal, leaving me completely cut off from the outside world. Panic threatened to consume me as I stood alone in the darkness, the silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I knew that I had to find answers, to unravel the chilling truth behind the vanishing cargo before it was too late. With a renewed sense of determination, I climbed back into the cab of my truck and set out into the night, scouring the desolate landscape for any sign of what had happened. But no matter how far I drove or how hard I searched, there was no trace of my missing cargo. Hours passed, the darkness seeming to stretch on endlessly as I drove deeper into the heart of Wyoming. The isolation weighed heavily on me, the sense of dread growing with each passing mile. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it, a flicker of movement on the side of the road, a shadowy figure darting between the trees. Heart pounding, I slammed on the brakes and climbed out of the cab, my senses on high alert. But as I approached the spot where I had seen the movement, there was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant call of a lone coyote. I shook my head in disbelief, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew that something was out there, something dark and malevolent lurking in the shadows. With a sense of growing unease, I climbed back into the cab and pressed on, the road stretching out before me like a never-ending ribbon of darkness. But no matter how fast I drove or how far I traveled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was following me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As dawn broke on the horizon, I finally reached the outskirts of a small town, the first signs of civilization I had seen in hours. With a sigh of relief, I pulled into a gas station and climbed out of the cab, grateful to be surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights and the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But as I filled up my tank and glanced nervously around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the darkness that had haunted me on the highway was still lurking just out of sight. With a shudder, I climbed back into the cab and pressed on, vowing never to return to that desolate stretch of highway again. But deep down, I knew that the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks in the most unexpected of places. As a trucker, I've driven through my fair share of eerie landscapes, but nothing could have prepared me for the bone-chilling encounter I had one foggy night in the hills of West Virginia. It was late, the fog hanging thick in the air like a shroud as I navigated the winding roads. Visibility was poor, and I strained my eyes to make out the road ahead, the only sound the rumble of my engine and the eerie silence of the night. Suddenly, through the dense fog, I saw it, the faint outline of another truck looming in the distance. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming it was just another fellow trucker making their way through the night. But as I drew closer, a sense of unease washed over me. There was something off about the truck, something unnatural. It seemed to be moving without a driver, weaving dangerously from side to side as it barreled down the road. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched in horror, unable to tear my eyes away from the ghostly apparition before me. I knew I should have turned back, should have fled from whatever unseen horror was lurking in the fog. But something compelled me forward, a curiosity mingled with fear that kept me rooted in place as the driverless truck drew nearer. As it passed by me, I caught a glimpse of the empty cab, the steering wheel spinning wildly as if controlled by some invisible force. Cold sweat beaded on my brow as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but before I could react, the truck had disappeared into the fog, leaving me alone on the desolate road once more. Shaken but determined, I pressed on, the image of the driverless truck burned into my mind like a nightmare I couldn't shake. But as the miles stretched on and the fog grew thicker, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't get any more terrifying, I saw it again, the faint outline of the driverless truck materializing out of the fog, its headlights piercing the darkness like twin beacons of doom. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that it was following me, matching my pace with an eerie precision that sent shivers down my spine. Panic surged through me as I floored the accelerator, desperate to outrun the relentless pursuit of the phantom truck. But no matter how fast I drove or how hard I pushed my rig to its limits, the driverless truck stayed hot on my heels, its headlights looming ever closer in the rearview mirror like the eyes of some malevolent specter. My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan, but the fog was thickening, obscuring my vision and leaving me disoriented and vulnerable. I knew I had to find a way to shake off the relentless pursuit of the phantom truck before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I veered off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path, hoping to lose the driverless truck in the maze of twisting trails. But to my horror, it followed me, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of death. I pushed my rig to its limits, the engine roaring as I navigated the treacherous terrain, but still the driverless truck stayed hot on my heels, its presence looming ever closer with each passing moment. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a narrow bridge spanning a deep ravine, the only way out of the nightmare that had consumed me. With a prayer on my lips, I gunned the engine and barreled across the bridge, my heart pounding in my chest as I felt the weight of the truck behind me. But as I reached the other side and glanced back, I saw something that chilled me to the core. The driverless truck had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of its existence behind. With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I recounted the terrifying ordeal that had unfolded on the lonely backroads of West Virginia. But even as I spoke to the dispatcher, I couldn't shake the feeling that the driverless truck was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. It was a moonless night, and the only illumination came from the dim glow of my truck's headlights as I rumbled down the lonely stretch of highway that cut through the swamps of Louisiana. The air was thick with humidity, and the oppressive heat seemed to seep into my bones as I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes scanning the road ahead for any sign of danger. As I approached the old bridge that spanned the murky waters below, a sense of unease settled over me like a shroud. The bridge was ancient, its rusted steel beams groaning under the weight of my truck as I rolled onto its creaking surface. I could feel the wooden planks beneath my tires shudder with each passing moment, and I prayed silently that they would hold. But then, without warning, the crackling voice of my radio cut out, leaving me alone in the darkness with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Panic surged through me as I frantically fiddled with the dials, trying to coax some sign of life from the dead airwaves, but it was no use. The radio remained silent, and I was left alone in the suffocating darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was completely cut off from the outside world, stranded on the desolate bridge with no way to call for help. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, reminding myself that I was a seasoned trucker, capable of handling whatever the road threw at me. But deep down, I knew that this was different, that there was something sinister lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As I reached for my phone to try and call for help, a sudden chill swept over me, and I froze, my hand hovering inches from the screen. From somewhere below, I heard the faint sound of whispers, soft and insistent, like the murmurings of ghosts carried on the night breeze. I strained to make out the words, but they were nothing more than unintelligible murmurs, barely audible over the roar of the water below. Yet despite their incomprehensibility, I felt a shiver run down my spine, and a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. I glanced nervously out the window, half expecting to see shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, but the swamp below was as still and silent as death itself. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were peering out from the depths, watching my every move with malevolent intent. With trembling hands, I restarted my truck, the engine roaring to life with a deafening roar that echoed through the night. But even as I pulled away from the bridge, I couldn't escape the feeling of unease that lingered like a dark cloud over my head. As I drove on through the night, the whispers faded into the distance, but the memory of them haunted me like a nightmare I couldn't shake. And though I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, a part of me knew that something sinister lurked in the swamps of Louisiana, something ancient and malevolent that had been awakened by my passing. And as I drove on into the night, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever escape its clutches, or if I was doomed to become just another victim of the whispering waters.